Second question, Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing under my name on the order paper.
My Lords, the best way to address the humanitarian situation is by ending the fighting as soon as possible. That is why I've repeatedly said an immediate pause in fighting is necessary. UK aid is saving children's lives. We're doing everything we can to get more aid into Gaza. We've trebled our aid commitment to the occupied Palestinian territories. This includes targeted support for children through our 5.75 million contribution to UNICEF, and children are also benefiting from life-saving food, shelter and health support that we're providing through partnerships with other UN agencies, through NGOs and the Red Crescent societies.
I thank the noble Lord, but surely a pause in fighting is not enough. We need a permanent ceasefire now. But very specifically, I'm sure the noble Lord is aware of the awful fate of 6-year-old Hind Rajab, calling for help in the midst of the bodies of her dead relatives, who appears to have died with 2 Red Crescent would-be rescuers. Has the government, or will the government, demand answers from the Israeli government about what happened to Hind and her family and the rescuers? And is the government challenging the Israeli government about the risks to hundreds of thousands of children in Rafah, now in the path of the Israeli offensive? Surely it's time to stop all arms shipments to Israel, as an Dutch court has demanded that that state do, and implement targeted sanctions against members of the Israeli leadership, particularly those calling for new settlements in Gaza and on the West Bank.
Hear, hear.
The noble lady asked a number of questions there. First of all, the case she raises is completely tragic, and what is happening in Gaza is tragic. We want to see an end to this suffering, an end to this killing. Let me just make this point, that the pause we're calling for, we want to turn into a ceasefire by making sure the conditions are right for getting a stop in the fighting to mean a permanent ceasefire. The way you do that is by fulfilling a number of conditions. You've got to get, in our view, the Hamas leaders out of Gaza. Otherwise, any ceasefire won't last because the problem will still be there. You've got to dismantle the operation of terrorist attacks. You've got to have a new Palestinian Authority government in place. You've got to give the Palestinian people a political horizon to a better future and a two-state solution. And crucially, you've got to release all of the hostages and do that very quickly. She asked whether we challenge the Israel government over individual episodes. Yes, we absolutely do. I've done that personally with them over, for instance, a building that was bombed that had UK medics and other charities in, and we'll continue to do that as part of the very important process that we go through to judge whether they are in compliance with international humanitarian law.
Is my noble friend the Minister aware of any moves by Hamas to protect the children of Gaza? For instance, by releasing all the hostages, as he just mentioned, or indeed stopping attacks on Israel and the leaders fleeing to the Gulf? Is he aware of any moves like that? Because I agree with everything you said.
My noble friend makes a very good point. I mean, it's worth remembering that on the 7th of October, 29 children were killed by Hamas and 39 children were taken hostage, and they still remain hostages today. And of course, it's right that in this House we keep asking what else Israel should do, but we should also, at the very same time, say what Hamas should do, which is to lay down their weapons and stop right now. They could stop this fight immediately.
That the IDF have suggested that they are in no rush to enter into Rafah and that they will delay possibly until after Ramadan, and that meanwhile the negotiations in Cairo can continue, and that gives a chance for Hamas to release the hostages and for the conflict to stop.
Well, that is absolutely right. I believe those discussions are underway, and it's a great pity that they didn't reach that conclusion the last time they were underway. And as I said, that is the best outcome we could seek, which is an immediate stop in the fighting. Let's hope that the stop is for as long as possible. I think that Israel was content to offer a month or 6 weeks in terms of a pause. Then we need the momentum to turn that pause into a permanent ceasefire without a return to the fighting. That should be our goal. But crucially, the pause is necessary to get the aid in and to get the hostages out.
To UNICEF. UNICEF have said today that 600,000 children are displaced within Rafah. For the
My Lords, there's plenty of time. We'll hear from the noble Lord Purvis of Tweed
followed by the Noble Lord Green.
I'm grateful for the Chief Whip. My Lords, UNICEF has said today that 600,000 children are displaced within Rafah in Gaza. That is comparable to the entire under-12 population of Scotland being displaced to one postcode area. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that any belligerent in a conflict that advises children and civilians to relocate on the pretext of their safety, but relocate to an area where there is no shelter, where there is no water, where there is no medicine, and when there is no security guarantees, is a war crime?
Well, what I would say to the Noble Lord is what I said yesterday when I was in Scotland, which is, the people who are in Rafah on many occasions have already moved 3, 4 or 5 times. And it's not possible to move again. They can't go north because they'll be going back to homes that have been destroyed. They can't go south because that would involve going into Egypt, which none of us want to see and the Egyptians don't want to see. And that is why it's so important the Israelis stop and think before going ahead with any operations in Rafah.
My Lords, does the Noble Lord, the Foreign Secretary, agree that the huge number of civilian casualties in Gaza is deeply damaging to the reputation of Israel itself? And will he therefore take action to promote a change of strategy by the Israelis, taking up the other measures that he's mentioned, but for so long as so many civilians, thousands of civilians are being killed, then that has to stop?
Our view right from the start is that while Israel has a right to defend itself, and the attacks on October the 7th were an appalling attack on Israel, and it's worth remembering it was the biggest pogrom since the Holocaust in terms of the loss of life of Jewish people. We shouldn't forget that. While that is a tragedy they had every right to respond to and to try and prevent happening again, they must obey international humanitarian law. And let's be clear, that involves not only what the IDF do in terms of the way they prosecute their actions in terms of this war, but it also means, as they are the occupying power in Gaza, that they have to make sure that humanitarian aid, that food and water and shelter are available to people in Gaza, because if they don't do that, that would be a breach of international humanitarian law as well.
My Lords, the Foreign Secretary is right. The priority has to be securing an immediate, I'd say an extended pause in fighting to ensure we can get aid in, the remaining hostages out, and create room for a long-term sustainable ceasefire, followed by an even longer-term resolution. But there are currently almost 1.5 million displaced Palestinians in Rafah, and it's the main route for humanitarian aid. Any further Israeli offensive in Rafah will be catastrophic. Now, my Lords, the situation is getting more urgent by the hour. I know he's been working to establish a contact group of regional and international leaders who would influence both sides. Is he able to offer any progress on that group or their ability currently to try and influence events?
Well, what I can say to the Noble Lady is that at the Munich Security Conference on Friday, there will be a meeting of the key European countries that help to fund the occupied Palestinian territories and the key Arab states and Gulf states that are working to help support a future Palestinian Authority, and we very much hope the Secretary of State for the United States will be there as well. This isn't the yet formation of a contact group. There are a number of countries, particularly in the Arab world, that understandably are nervous about meeting in advance of a proper ceasefire and plan towards a cessation of hostilities. But I think we're on the way to getting this group, which I know she's long called for, up and running. And it's important because there are lots of things we need to start talking about now, whether that is what happens the day after a pause, whether it's about a reconstituted Palestinian Authority, whether it's about this question of how you offer a political horizon to people in the Palestinian territories, or indeed how we deal with Israel's very real security concerns of if there is a pause and then a ceasefire, how do you make sure the people responsible for October the 7th cannot remain in Gaza and the infrastructure of terror is taken down?
My Lords, alongside medical aid, thank you. My Lords, alongside medical aid on the ground, one practical step that the government could take with an immediate impact would be to support medical care to children injured in Gaza on a temporary basis in the United Kingdom. I know my noble friend and his department have been looking at this possibility, and I would be grateful if he could update us on progress.
Well, I want to thank my noble friend for that. We are looking at Project Pure Hope. We're looking very closely at this. Is it possible to take the people in greatest need and bring them to British hospitals, as we've done in the past? I think, I would say, the early work we've done is to say that there's much we can do in the region, and we should probably do that first. So helping in the field hospitals that have been established, helping to send medical teams to referral hospitals that are being used in the region, supporting organisations like Medical Aid for Palestinians. Now, if that leads to the identification of specific cases where actually they would be better off taking that long journey back to Britain and going to Great Ormond Street or elsewhere, then we certainly don't rule that out, and we'll continue to look at it.
Third question, Lord Walmsley.
Thank you. I beg leave